famous little story about the 5 sisters who, so near the end of the book, I mean, if you've been coming every week, you know this, they were apportioning different parts of the land to the different tribes. And these 5, and it was according to the father, according to the men, the heads of the clans or the family heads. And these 5 sisters, the daughters of Zelophehad, that was their father's name, he had died, they had no brothers. This is last week. And they asked for justice, that if there's no man to inherit, what about us? And Moses didn't even know what to say, and he consulted God, and God said, they are correct. Let the daughters inherit if there are no sons. And that was really the beginning of property rights for women, probably anywhere in the world. You know, very few places where, I mean, yes, a widow could inherit, but not a daughter to this degree. So that was a big step forward. And ultimately, daughters became equal in inheritance rights as men. Now we're at the very, very last chapter. Actually, there's a tiny little bit after that, which if we have time, I'll talk about. But, and then really in terms of the story, it ends. And the book, the 5th book, the book of Deuteronomy, was not found for another like 200 years. It was found in like 630 BCE. This was probably written around 800 BCE or so. It was written, took place before that, way before, but written down. And there's the theory that it was found in the temple when they were like renovating the temple by a king named Josiah, and his priests and prophets came and said, oh my God, we found this new book, which is the book of Deuteronomy. And, you know, biblical scholars believe that it was written at that time, perhaps by the prophet Jeremiah. But what that book is a Moses giving 6 long speeches and basically reviewing everything they've been through, retelling the 10 commandments, retelling everything that happened, reviewing a lot of the laws, adding a few more laws. The Shema is in that book. The V'ahavta is in that book. But the plot or the actual action of the people ends here at the end of Numbers. And then the rest is like a review. And then at the very end of the book of Deuteronomy, Moses dies. And that's the last paragraph of the Torah. Never again did there arise in the among Israel a man like a prophet like Moses who spoke to God face to face. That's the end of that. However, what is at the very end of, I find it very interesting, at the very end of the book of Bamidbar in the desert, the last sort of laws almost that they're telling you. Okay, it says, we've given you all these rules and regulations, but people are people and there's going to be vengeance. And this is where they set up the cities of refuge. And this is an idea, I guess it happened in the ancient world, but I've never really read about it so specifically laid out. Of course, I'm not an ancient history scholar, as these cities of refuge. And then the Talmud even goes further. And in the book of, which I didn't know, but I found the commentary, the book of Joshua, because the cities of refuge are set up in the Torah, but in the next book, the book of Joshua, which I have for you, we learn the rules. How do you get there? What's the rules? How long do you stay? What happens when you get there? And what is a city of refuge? Does anybody know who it's for? Anybody know?
Manslayers.
It's a city, it's for somebody who accidentally killed a person, manslaughter, accidental, but their kin, their clan is going to try to kill you in revenge. It's this acknowledgement there's still blood feuds in the ancient world. And it's like saying don't do it doesn't seem to be enough. People are going to do it. They know human nature. So they actually set up these cities all over the land. We're going to read about them, where people can be safe and you're not allowed to take vengeance. And what do they look like and all that stuff? Before that, we learn about the Levites and their rights. Now, who are the Levites? I just want to review. It's one tribe, but what made them special? Does anybody remember? the Levites.
They were guardians of the temple.
So they were the one tribe who were going to take care of the temple, but in pre-temple times, they're the ones who actually worked at all the sanctuaries all over the country. They supervised the sacrifices. The high priest, there were priests, and then there were Levites. The priests were kind of like at the top, and the Levites did all of the work. And the high priest is the one that did the atonement and the sacrifice on Yom Kippur. But the priests, the Kohanim, were part of the Levite tribe. Like not all Levites were Kohanim, but all Kohanim were Levites. So when you talk about the Levite tribe, you're talking about the priests and the Levites. That anybody, and I've mentioned this, if your name is Levin, Levi, Levinson, Levine, Levine, you supposedly are descended from the Levite tribe. And if your name is Khan, Cohen, Kagan, something like that, there's the thinking that your family was a Kohen, because in the old days, your last name described who you were. So it would have been, Shmuel the Levite, Shmuel Levi. Yes, Penina?
Okay. My husband's family is a Levi, and so I became a Levite too when I married him. And yes, on his tomb, on this grave stone, it's written Yoshua ben Ephraim Alevi.
Levi, the Levite, exactly. And the HaKohen is also often written. Okay, so we're going to look at the text. And so the first thing they say is that wait, hold on. Let me get up here. I actually have a picture of where the city, all the bold is the actual text it's in Mas'ei, which is the last Parshat of the book of Numbers. Okay, so, and they were at Moab by the Jordan at Jericho. They were on the Jordan River. They were about to cross over. So this is like right where they are. And then the next book says, okay, before you go, and then Moses talks for an entire book, basically, which also I found interesting. Biblical scholars, they say, in all the other books, Moses doesn't talk a lot. Moses has a speech defect. Moses is not, particularly eloquent. And now he's like incredibly poetic and eloquent and speaks so beautifully. And they say that's attributed to a different writer of this book who imbued him with all this articulate wisdom. Okay, so let's just start though with, okay, now they've given out all the land. They've apportioned it all over. There's a discussion who's going to be on this side of the Jordan, that side of the Jordan. Some are staying. And now all the land is gone. But what about the Levites? They didn't get a state, a colony. If you think of like the 12 tribes, kind of like the 13 colonies, everybody had their territory. What about the Levites? So now we go to them. So Susan Ehrlich, why don't you read?
All right. The Lord spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho, saying, command the people of Israel to give to the Levites some of the inheritance of their possession as cities for them to dwell in. And you shall give to the Levites pasture lands around the cities.
So they're saying some cities I think it's interesting that they say cities, because I guess there were cities. The Levites get to have cities in all of the different tribes that you have to apportion some land for them because they're going to be doing their sanctuary work and they need to be supported. Okay, one more paragraph.
The cities shall be theirs to dwell in, and their pasture lands shall be for the cattle and for their livestock and for all their beasts. The pasture lands of the cities, which you shall give to the Levites, shall reach from the wall of the city outward 1,000 cubits.
Okay, so a cubit this is my note, 18 inches. So 1,000 cubits, he's going to talk, is 1,500 feet. So, because I said, what's a cubit? Okay, continue.
Quarter mile.
And you shall measure outside the city on the east side 2,000 cubits, and on the south side 2,000 cubits, on the west side 2,000 cubits, and on the north side 2,000 cubits, the city being in the middle. This shall belong to them as pasture land for their cities.
So that's 3,000 feet in each direction around. And what's a mile? 5,000.
5,280 feet.
Oh, you know that right off the top of your head, Eric. Thank you. So it's like a half a mile or a little more to a little more than a half a mile in each direction around a city belongs to the Levites. And okay, so Eric, you want to read?
The cities that you give to the Levites shall be the 6 cities of refuge, where you shall permit the manslayer to flee. And in addition, you shall give 42 cities. All the cities that you give to the Levites shall be 48 with their pasture land.
So 48 cities divided by 12 is 4 cities per tribe. If you think about it, there's 12 tribes. So there'd be 4 cities per tribe where Levites would live. So they would live, and they were basically the judges, not rabbis, but yes, the purveyors of the Torah, of the law, of the custom. So they would be in each city, and among them would be 6 cities of refuge, which we'll find out what that is. Okay. One more, Eric.
And as for the cities that you give from the possession of the people of Israel, from the larger tribes you shall take many, and from the smaller tribes you shall take few, each in proportion to the inheritance that it inherits, shall give of its cities to the Levites.
Okay, so I was wrong. I forgot. It's not like everybody gives 4 cities. If you're a smaller tribe, you might give 3 or 2. And if you're a larger tribe, you might have 6, because you'd need them scattered all over the large portion. And I know the smallest tribe was Benjamin. I think Judah was fairly large, and they were side by side. So it depended on, I guess, how many people were there and their land. So now this is like the setup. It's amazing. I mean, I've never heard of such a thing where you take care of your holy men, your religious leaders in such a way, that you give them cities, you give them pasture. And also, as we know, when you sacrificed, every sacrifice, you gave some of the meat to the priests, to the Levites and the Kohanim. They ate as well, and you gave them food. So you brought them food, and you gave them land, and you whatever, and in return they worked for you. Their lives were dedicated to God and to the holy part of the national life of the people. Okay. Any questions? Anything? Okay. Oh, Cindy, you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah. So they're still in the desert at this point. So
they're on the border. They're on the border.
So is all the dividing of the land dependent on what the spies found out when they were there for the 40 days?
I don't know.
How are they going to divide a land they haven't been to?
It's already divided. It's all, previously in this Parshat, they divided it. They've already divided.
How do they know if they haven't been there yet?
Well, there were spies there. We know that. Yeah.
So it was based on the spies and what they
I would assume the 2 spies who told them.
Well, they have evicted the original inhabitants.
They didn't. They sort of say so in the Torah, but archaeologically they did not.
There were tribes that never left. Only 70 people went down to Egypt in the beginning. There were a lot of tribes that stayed there. All the tribes stayed there.
Well, there weren't
the original division that Jacob gave them.
Okay, but Penina, there weren't tribes yet. There were just
tribes. They were supposed, when they entered, they each had the flag of its tribe, and they knew what they were going to begin with.
Coming in. Okay.
Yes, coming in, and while they're there, that was a temporary court, actually, before they developed and established the 10 Commandments as a base to make judges and people that will follow the law under the judges and it was divided just like the judicial system now. You have like a court for the high
when
And
they
then the
went
smaller courts,
all right, but when they went on to Egypt,
they
according-
knew exactly where they were going.
okay, I don't want to go into that, but archaeologically, we know that
Archaeologically,
a lot of people, some people remained in Canaan, and they lived, even though in the story, like they conquered the cities and this and that, they actually lived with the population. And perhaps they took it over, but they lived with the population, and a lot of them were like friends, considered friends of theirs and allies, because we see how they fought with them in some of the wars and
Yes.
things like that.
yes.
And this was written after the fact. Don't forget, the Torah was written like in 800 BCE. This is already after King Saul and King David. This is already, they live there now. Now it's already a country. So now they're sort of telling the story of how we got the country. And we can take it with a grain of salt, literally, how they did that. But for sure, they set up these cities of refuge. And this is a very unique idea. And some of them stayed on one side of the Jordan and some of them crossed over, and they basically lived with the population. But I guess they conquered it to some degree, meaning that they ruled it, but they didn't wipe out the population.
Archaeological finding says that there were part that never left, and that
Yes,
was
there was a part that never left, but they did
and
not
they knew
ever.
exactly where they went.
Okay. All right. So, Cindy, why don't you read verse 9?
Yeah, I got my hands full.
You can't read?
No.
Okay. Brad, do you want to read? Brad,
I'll read.
Well,
I'll read, Ken.
Okay. Who said that? Brad, go
It-
ahead. Okay, go ahead. 9.
Okay,
verse-
and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel, and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall select cities to be cities of refuge for you, that the manslayer who kills any person without intent may flee there.
Keep going.
The cities shall be for you a refuge from the avenger, that the manslayer may not die until he stands before the congregation for judgment. And the cities that you shall give be your 6 cities of refuge. You shall give 3 cities beyond the Jordan and 3 cities in the land of Canaan to be cities of refuge. These 6 cities shall be for refuge for the people of Israel and for the stranger and for the sojourner among them, that anyone who kills any person without intent may flee there."
Okay, I want to stop here for a minute. Do you find anything really sort of remarkable about the setup of these cities? I found something when I was reading it very interesting. Penina, what is it that you think is remarkable?
Well, before you have an actually constructed, put together that works judicial system, they have to have some kind of a place where the doubt would be enough to save the person's life. So
Yes.
if you didn't have a witness, which later on you need a witness to prove a point, they didn't put it to work yet. It wasn't really working.
Yes, but what
So-
I'm asking is something else.
So
Who's
that was a
included?
way of saving a person's life if you weren't sure that he is really a murderer.
Right, but who who is welcome in the cities of refuge? Did you notice? It said the
Person
stranger.
who killed by a mistake or something like that.
No,
or-
not only that though, the stranger and the sojourner.
Right,
So-
everybody. Right.
Okay, so if you were meaning a native non-Israelite who lived in the land, you could go to a city of refuge. If you were passing through a trader, a caravan or whatever, and there was an accidental death, you could also be accepted there. So
It's amazing, isn't it?
I find that remarkable that the justice was not, and usually it's our people it's for us, and then you're the other and you're different. But I find it remarkable at this early time that strangers and outsiders were afforded the same protection and the same ability to go there as the Israelites. So I found that pretty interesting. I wanted to point that out. Okay, let's see. So, okay, Benjamin, do you want to read? Hold on, where am
I'd
I?
be delighted
Rabbi,
to.
Yes,
Rabbi, can I just make a point
of
here
course.
that you have to situate this into a context into which there were no such things as jails. The prison is a product of the Enlightenment. And previously, I mean, the way you dealt with the criminal was either to kill them or to banish them. So putting somebody in a jail wasn't an option because they
Right.
didn't exist.
That's very interesting. And yet they set up a city. It's kind of a banishment, but it's kind of, you'll see how they were treated. They could be treated very well and live there very nicely if they were considered just a manslayer and not a murderer. But here's what a murderer is. They make sure that you say, well, what's a manslayer? Okay, this is a murderer, and these people cannot come to the city. So Ben, did you want to read, Benjamin?
Yes, 16, Cantor,
Yes.
is that correct?
Yeah.
But if he struck him down with an iron object so that he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall be put to death. And if he struck him down with a stone tool that could cause death, and he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall be put to death. Or if he struck him down with a wooden tool that could cause death, and he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall be put to death.
Okay, let's just read a little more, and then we're going to talk about
The
this.
avenger of blood shall himself put the murderer to death. When he meets him, he shall put him to death. And if he pushed him out of hatred or hurled something at him, lying in wait so that he died, or in enmity struck him down with his hand so that he died, then he who struck the blow shall be put to death. He is a murderer. The avenger of blood shall put the murderer to death when he meets him.
Okay. So basically, the avenger of blood is a relative, a kinsman, I would assume. And I'm curious, why do you think they went into such detail? If it's wood, if it's stone, if it's iron, if he's lying in wait, why do you think they went into such detail of making sure it's very clear?
Motive. Yeah,
And
if you have a tool like that, it indicates that you're using lethal force deliberately, I think is the idea. I mean, it's an interesting thing, like in court, they go into the background of the accused.
it is interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, what if the person just uses their hands to kill somebody? I mean, you can kill somebody with your hands.
Then it seems like they get a little bit of a break.
Well, no,
But that can be.
If he's lying in wait and then he kills him.
But that's different. I mean,
If it's just in the middle of a fight, it looks like it's all right.
I think if there's intent to kill, and then, and they can tell they're saying, obviously, if you hit someone with stone, don't tell me you didn't mean to kill him. If you hit someone with iron, you didn't mean to kill him. If you choked him to death, I have to look, and I'm sure the Talmud goes into it more, but that it's more like accidentally, and they'll tell you what accidental means in a minute. But what I also think is interesting, the Talmud has to go into this, like, how do you decide how he was killed? And then does the avenger do they tell him you can kill him, or is the avenger just like out for blood and finds him and kills him? Obviously they're saying, okay, family, you can take revenge. They're giving it up to the family to do. There is no jail, as Brad said. And there is a court, yes. But as we'll read later, you actually have to plead your case at the gates of the city of refuge to even get in. And they interrogate you at the gates. And if they think you are a murderer, they're not allowed to let you in. And then you're like on the run because the Avenger is going to find you. So, okay, yes, Nina. No, you muted yourself again.
I think the whole idea is that there were rules. That
They
there was establishment of rules, a set of rules.
Rules,
They
yes.
are playing now which and how, but this is something that what they saw happening. A person did this and a person did that, so they can build on what they saw people doing. But the whole idea that was rules already. That's the main
There
thing.
were rules, but these are very,
That's the whole idea. They started to build a structure of this is what you said. There are rules, and with rules comes order.
that's
So
right. I
that's the
agree.
idea of the beginning to establishing law and order. There
Okay.
are rules. Where they are correct or not, till today we are debating rules. We don't
That's-
think everything that the court is doing today is correct. But people, at least there are rules. So some of
Okay.
them will not be so great, but some of them would save life.
Okay, so Rebecca, do you want to read? 22.
But if he pushed him suddenly without enmity, or hurled anything on him without lying in wait, or used a stone that could cause death, and without seeing him dropped it on him, so that he died, though he was not his enemy and did not seek his harm, then the congregation shall judge between the manslayer and the avenger of blood in accordance with these rules.
Yes, so if you know you threw something out the window and it killed someone accidentally, or if you threw something away and it hit somebody, I mean it's and you had no enmity and it was an accident, then you have to go to court and people have to hear it. Keep going.
And the congregation shall rescue the manslayer from the hand of the avenger of blood, and the congregation shall restore him to a city of refuge to which he has fled, and he shall live in it until the death of the high priest who was anointed with the holy oil.
All right, one more.
But if the manslayer shall at any time go beyond the boundaries of his city of refuge to which he fled, and the avenger of blood finds him outside the boundaries of his city of refuge, and the avenger of blood kills the manslayer, he shall not be guilty of blood, for he must remain in his city of refuge until the death of the high priest. But after the death of the high priest, the manslayer may return to the land of his possession, and these things shall be for a statute and rule for you throughout your generation in all your dwelling places.
Okay. Why do
It's a
you
start.
think the death of the high priest would release the manslayer from having to stay there? What does that have to do with anything? Any ideas about that? It's interesting that come on, can just anything come to mind?
The length of a sentence. They're
Yeah,
trying to establish the length of a sentence.
But it could be an old high priest and he could die in 6 months, then you're free. Or it could be a young high priest and you could be there for 20 years.
Yeah.
So the length
Rabbi,
yeah. Oh, hi, Lorraine. How are you?
how are you? It's good to see you.
Good to see you. You have an answer? You have an idea?
I think it would it be something along the lines that the Kohanim
Wait, you're cutting out.
of some of the sins that
Oh God, we can't
really-
understand you.
I don't know.
Can't understand you. I'm so sorry.
I don't know. I'm so sorry. I'm
Now I can hear
traveling.
you. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll pass it along.
No, I can hear you now. Go ahead.
I was gonna say that in some way it seems like there's an issue about responsibility, whereas the Kohanim may also represent be somewhat responsible of that in a strange way. And then after the Kohanim dies, then responsibility is absolved, I guess. I don't know, or forgiven. I don't know. That's what came to mind.
Anybody else have an idea?
Well,
of what Brad? Yeah.
Rabbi, something that's not is somehow related to rehabilitation. You know, our prison system, which was, again, a product of the Enlightenment, is based on the fact that somebody does their time, and during that time, they are rehabilitated. And at that point, when they're rehabilitated, they are ready to re-enter society. This does not seem to be in any sense, at least in this biblical passage, related with the concept of rehabilitation of the individual. It's very random, that it's just based on when another person dies, is when that person is liberated from the city of refuge.
So yes, however, and this manslayer is not considered a criminal. He accidentally killed someone, so he could have been a very upstanding person. And we're going to read that a lot of them became prominent and successful, and they say you shouldn't, because they were a manslayer, you shouldn't like appoint them to high office, which means they could have been. I mean, they just couldn't go home, because if they stepped outside, the avenger, the blood avenger, was going to kill them. So I don't know if there was a need for rehabilitation, because they weren't criminals. These were not killers or thieves or whatever. This was a person who, oh my God, I killed someone by accident. The family's going to kill me. I've got to get away. But just a minute. I know Penina will relate to this. Primitively, there was this idea that the Kohen was like a pure being, and his death was an atonement for the sins of the avenger. And this idea of it's like echoes of human sacrifice or atonement through a person's death. He was a pure person, and his atonement was considered a way to wash away his sins. It's almost like a Jesus thing when you think about Jesus, dying for somebody else's sins. So there must have been that idea in the ancient. We know, like in Greek mythology, they killed, Iphigenia so that they could all go to Troy. Another thought was, this is the Talmud says, people will be so depressed about the death of the Kohen that they don't want to think about it anymore, and they let him go. That even the Avengers are like, oh, we're too, depressed. So that was another idea. And there's a few others that I have, we'll get to in a minute. But it is, I feel like the rabbis and the Talmud and whatever, the commentaries are sort of struggling to figure out exactly. And the thing about the atonement of a pure person for someone else's sins in the ancient world seems like it makes sense. Yes, Penina.
Okay.
You're muted again. You remuted yourself.
Again? Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I am looking at it, that what happened with Moses. This is when the priest died, it's like a divine intervention that like God decides. Because what happened with Moses? He killed a person and he ran away, and he became the one who wrote the 10 Commandments. So if they are doing a judicial system altogether, you have to go to the source. What happened to him? So that's exactly what they're copying. He ran, he didn't go back because he was going to put to death, and yet he did something amazing. He came up with the 10 Commandments and took thousands of people to freedom, to a land where they can prosper and live freely. So you have to have some kind of a case. You know how it goes even today? They go by cases.
Right. Yeah.
When they decide on the whatever it is that the person is going to be condemned for, most of the time they build it on previous cases. So Moses is one example. And I think, and this is why they came up with this thing. That's what happened with him exactly.
Okay, let's continue now, because now we have the commentary.
Can I just say hello to everybody real quick? Hi.
Hi, how are you? Nice to see you.
I miss you. Love you.
Same here. Nice to see you. Okay. Oh, wait a minute now. There's a little bit more. Okay. These shall be for a statute. Now, here's the thing that, is this the end? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to read this because this is very interesting here. If anyone kills a person, the murderer shall be put to death on the evidence of witnesses, but no person shall be put to death on the testimony of one witness. So in the Talmud, Rabbi Akiva said, you need 2 eyewitnesses to put someone to death. And Rabbi Akiva in the Talmud said, if you kill one person in 70 years, that's a bloody court. That's a bloodthirsty court. So even though they talk about put to death, it's not that easy to convict and execute or allow someone to be, it has to be really in front of witnesses in cold blood, heartless. Moreover, you shall accept no ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of death, but he shall be put to death. And you shall accept no ransom for him who has fled to a city of refuge, that he may return to dwell in the land before the death of the high priest. So you can't pay for the murderer to save him, and you can't pay to let somebody out of the city of refuge. You shall not pollute the land in which you live, for blood pollutes the land, and no atonement can be made for the land for the blood that is shed in it, except by the blood of the one who shed it. You shall not defile the land in which you live, in the midst of which I dwell. For I, the Lord, dwell in the midst of the people of Israel. So, whoops. Wait a minute. I made a mistake here. I wanted to do stop share, not that. All right, share and then stop share. When you read that, I don't know if that the death penalty was ever used in Israel except for Eichmann. Isn't that correct? That was the only time they ever had the death penalty. And that was, mass murder on genocide on a huge scale.
And nobody wanted to do it.
Right. And when you read this, it's hard to reconcile then that they went into the land of Jericho and killed everyone, and they went here and they killed, and it's probably, it feels to me like lore, you know what I mean? Or that part of the murdering of the inhabitants, unless they were attacked, and they were defending themselves. Like the Philistines were their historical enemies, and they were always fighting with them. But it seems like the idea, what do you think about this idea, even today, that blood or murder pollutes the land or pollutes the population, the people?
I think it does.
I think it does too.
Okay.
It's the sanctity of life. It recognizes that.
It mechanizes that, but killing. Oh, wait, look at this country right now. We're having shootings every single day somewhere, every single day, and it's almost infectious. It's like you're infected by the violence, you're infected by the killing, and so it does spread. It spreads psychologically, and so when I read these things in the Torah, and they're so ancient, and when you hear about all the other kinds of punishments of slaves and people, and here even the stranger and the non-Israelite can be protected. This is what elevates to me. This is the part of the Torah that I'm in awe of. The stories, they're beautiful, and we learn a lot from them. But this idea of justice, this idea of even understanding psychologically how violence and bloodshed is an infection and a pollution in that ancient time, I find amazing and, very sophisticated in terms of thinking. Yeah, Brad.
Yeah, excuse me, Rabbi. This is the archetypal pattern set up in the Oedipus story, where Thebes is subject to a plague because of this murder that's taken place, that's polluted the land, and it's not until that murder is dealt with that the plague lifts. So yes, I mean it's an archetypal pattern, and very present in the entire ancient world, not just the Bible.
You're right. When you talk about Oedipus, you're right. And yet in medieval times and modern times, that idea went out the window. that idea, as opposed to ethnic cleansing. It's the opposite of ethnic cleansing, so to speak. You know what I mean? It's so, okay, let's now read the commentary about this, which I found very interesting. And okay, so this was the text. This was the Parsha. And now, what were the cities of refuge? Okay, we know this. The cities of refuge were 6 cities allocated in the Levite tribe of the Old Testament to provide asylum for perpetrators of unintentional manslaughter. They offered them, okay, the Levites were the only tribe who did not have land. I mean, you don't need to read this. Okay, but the Levites established and maintained these cities. They presided as the judicial authorities over them. As mediators between the Israelites and God, the Levites were gifted in their ideas. So they were the judges. Well, where were the cities? So these were the cities: Kadesh, Shem, which still exists today; Hebron, which still exists today; Golan, which is the Golan Heights; Ramot Gilad, and Bezer. And now here they are. Oh, wait, I want to read you one more thing before I show them to you. Okay. Who wants to read this? Susan, read this right here. The cities were.
Okay, the cities were strategically placed in order that they could be easily reached within 1 day of it travel or less. The cities of refuge also offered asylum to foreigners. The roads leading to the 6 cities were well maintained in order to ensure a smooth passage for fugitives. Additionally, clearly marked signposts were found at crossroads, which read Miklat, meaning refuge. That's interesting.
And we're going to read a little bit later. They said that the roads had to be smooth and twice the width of a normal road. If you were running for your life, you knew there were these cities of refuge and how to get there. So they were very cognizant of the danger of the blood avenger. That's what I get from this. Okay, so now I found a map of it, and here are the cities of refuge and where they were. This is the ancient time. So there was, where are they? Golan was here, which is, I guess, near the Golan Heights, I guess. Golan was one, and Ramot. So here's the Jordan. So this is on this side. This is Ramot Gilad. And let's
Kadesh in the north.
yeah, this is in the north. Here's Shem. And here's Bezer. And you can see also, this is interesting, where did the different tribes live? You know, which was their allocation? So here's Asher and Naphtali and Manasseh. All of these, no longer exist. Zebulun had a very small amount. And Manasseh had East Manasseh and West Manasseh. They must have been huge. Issachar, very little. Tabor, that's where Deborah was. Har Tabor, Mount of Tabor. Okay, and then Ephraim was very small, but, oh no, Benjamin was small, but Judah, we're all from Judah. Hebron, which exists today, that's in Judah. Yehuda, that's why we're called Jews, because that's all that was left. Simeon goes all the way down. So Moab is where they were. They said they were on, this is where they were about to enter, Moab, and then go up and enter. So this is where all of this took place. I find this really interesting. And as we know, I want to count and just the 10 tribes that were destroyed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the same. 1, 6, 7, 8, 9. I don't know. There's must be another 10. So, well, not 10. That must have been absorbed. Well, there are 10 tribes. We talk about the 10 lost tribes. These were all conquered by Syria. Here's Damascus right here in like 760 or something BCE. And they came down here and they conquered all of these tribes and took them off to captivity all the way down to like here, I think. And Benjamin and Judah were the only ones that were left. So, and some Jews fled here, and if they could get away, and this became the remnant that was Judea, Judah. This is where, and Jerusalem is in this section. Where's Jerusalem? Right here. If you see, Jerusalem is right here. I love this map.
Yeah.
It really gives you a great sense of what ancient Israel looked like. And it went all the way down the Sinai, basically. And here's there, and Moab and Edom were the other, foreign, and actually Gaza here, Gaza, this is where the Philistines, this was where the Philistines lived, along here in Gaza. Still enemies.
Right.
This is where they lived, here in Gaza. So it's fascinating. I thought I would. What?
They had 6 cities actually
Yeah, 6 cities.
lived in the Philistine.
I know, but I'm just showing you where they were.
One of them, yeah.
Okay. Okay, we talk about
And by the way, the target was always Egypt. We weren't the target. We were just on the way always. The target was always Egypt.
That's true. When the Babylonians and also the Assyrians.
All of them, because they were very rich, with all the
right. They were
elephants and all the stuff.
Okay, yep. I want to get to this. So, okay, Brad, why don't you read this? How did the cities of refuge protect people?
When a situation arose where an individual unintentionally killed someone, the perpetrator was to flee to one of the 6 cities of refuge. Once arrived, they were to stand in front of the gate and plead their case to the elders of the city, who were required to admit the fugitive inside the gates and offer them asylum. If an individual was to approach the gates of the city and demand blood justice from an offender that was being
Sorry, go ahead.
Protected inside, the elders were not allowed to surrender the person in question into the avenger's hands.
Okay, so we talked about this that until the okay, no, continue. Go ahead.
The fugitive was required to live within the walls of the city until they came to trial before the gathered assembly. If the high priest ruled in favor of the fugitive, he was allowed to continue living in the city until the death of the said priest who had acquitted him died. After that, the offender was free to return to his own home. If the offender left the protection of the city before the death of the high priest, then the one who sought vengeance had the right to kill him without being guilty of murder.
So fascinating. Okay, now this is something that Brad talked about in many ancient cultures. And the idea of sanctuary, we know, like in medieval times, you could take sanctuary in a church or in a cathedral. We also know that in the book of, we were just reading this about David, when that David was trying to kill, they would go to the altar and hold the horns of the altar, and they considered that, you couldn't kill them for that. So, okay, Penina, do you want to read? She's not listening. Okay, Lorraine, can you see it? No. Okay.
I'll read.
Okay, go ahead.
Origin and development?
Yeah.
Okay. In many ancient cultures, the inavailability of deities was considered to extend to their religious sanctuaries and all that reside within, whether criminals, debtors, escaped slaves, priests, ordinary people, or in some cases, passing cattle. Biblical scholars suspect that Israelite culture was originally no different.
Okay, so you could go into a religious sanctuary in any ancient culture of a god, and I love that cattle could also be protected in the sanctuary. Yeah. Criminal, but this is like different than in Judaism, where murderers could not be, but this is criminals, debtors, escape. This is only manslayers, but here criminals, debtors, slaves, priests, anyone could go and say, okay, sanctuary, I'm in the domain of the god. Okay, go ahead.
In general, the area covered by these rites of sanctuary varied from a small area around the altar or other centerpiece to a large area beyond the limits of the town. Containing the sanctuary, the limits often being marked in some way, depending on the significance of the deity and the importance of the sanctuary. It was considered a greater crime to drag an individual from the sanctuary to kill them there than it was to defile the sanctuary itself. Biblical scholars perceive the simple rite of asylum as sanctuaries as being present in the book of
Exodus.
Exodus.
Okay, because
Yeah,
we can
Exodus.
stop this. We don't have to
Okay.
read this. It's just
All right.
that there's parts of the Bible that talk about this idea of sanctuary. And then in the old days, over time, these general rights of asylum were curtailed as some sanctuaries had become notorious hotbeds of crime. In Athens, the regulations were changed so that slaves were only permitted to escape to the sanctuary of the Temple of Theseus. Yeah, if you're letting any criminal run into your sanctuary or your city, then you would get all of these criminals, which was different. Then you would need rehabilitation. Okay, in rabbinic sources. Okay, so this is fantastic. Panina, do you want to read this? Are you there?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, in rabbinic
As
sources.
killers were freed from the city of refuge upon the death of the high priest, the Mishnah states that the high priest's mother would traditionally supply them with clothing and food so that they would not wish for the death of her son. Wow.
Isn't that hilarious?
Amazing.
Say, you don't pray for my son to die. He's the high priest. So the mother would send the person who's staying there clothing and food. It's like have goodwill. Okay, keep going.
The Talmud argues that the death of the high priest formed an atonement, as the death of pious individuals counted as an atonement.
So that's this idea of the blood idea. Keep going.
Maimonides argued that the death of the high priest was simply an event so upsetting to the Israelites that they dropped all thoughts of vengeance. The Talmud states that in accordance with the requirement to especially build roads to the cities of refuge, the roads to these cities were not only marked by signposts saying refuge, but the roads were twice the regulation width and were particularly smooth and even in order that fugitives were as unhindered as possible. The classical rabbinical writers regarded all the cities controlled by the Levites as being cities of refuge, although they considered that asylum could only be claimed against the will of a city's inhabitants if the city was one of the 6 main cities of refuge.
Okay, so what they're saying is some classical rabbinical writers said that any city that the Levites lived in, they had 48 total, could be considered a city of refuge if the inhabitants agreed. But the 6 mentioned ones, they had no choice. They were designated. If you didn't want to live in a city of refuge, move, because that's what it was going to be. Okay, and then I love this. The substitute cities of refuge were constrained to be only of moderate size, since if they were too small, there could be scarcity of food, forcing the refugee to imperil himself by leaving the city to find sustenance. So it couldn't be too small that there wasn't enough food for the refugee to find food. And if they were too large, then it would be easy for an avenger of blood to hide in the crowd. It couldn't be too small, it couldn't be too large. Nevertheless, the surrounding region was required to be quite populous, so that way an attack by the avenger could be more easily repelled. So you actually have to repel the attack. The guy broke in there, snuck in there, or pretended to just be visiting and then tried to kill the person. You're supposed to repel the attack. Okay, Benjamin, do you want to read here as we end this thing? The altar.
The altar of the temple in Jerusalem also came to be regarded as a place of sanctuary, but only counted for the officiating priests, and even then only temporarily, as the priests ultimately had to be taken to the city of refuge. The rabbinic sources differentiated between 4 forms of killing, sometimes giving examples: complete innocence for which no further action was necessary. The situation arises when someone is killed while the perpetrator is fulfilling his legal duties, such as corporal punishment, for example, a father who strikes his son, a teacher who disciplines, chastises a student, and an agent of the court deputized to flog transgressors.
So, you're spanking your son and he died? It's innocent. You're beating your child because he was a wayward bad son, because they say you can do that if he's an alcoholic, if he's a drunkard and a slovenly person. So if you then it's considered completely innocent, and there's no avenger, and that's that. Okay, read the next one, Ben.
I love you, Susan.
Negligence, which required exile to a city of refuge. This situation arises when someone is killed as a result of legal activity, which the perpetrator was not required to perform.
Okay, well, that is like, I don't even know what that means. They were not required to perform, but it was legal. Like the others,
Maybe like a traffic accident or something?
Yeah.
It says they required
God.
exile to a
Okay.
city of refuge. It tells you which one you.
No, I know. And then the third one, Ben.
Severe carelessness for which exile is insufficient. This situation arises when someone is accidentally killed as a result of illegal activity by the perpetrator. For example, this situation arises if a shop owner fails to maintain their property and it collapses and kills a legitimate customer.
Oh,
God
so
forbid.
it's negligence. So it's negligence, and then murder.
Murder, which was subject to the death penalty.
So I find this is at the end of the whole 4 books, that were written at the, compiled. It's like, yes, we have all these laws, but we know you're human. You may, want to avenge. And obviously, I always say this, if they're telling you not to do something, it was happening. So there must have been a lot of blood feuds and blood vengeance. And
Till today.
Today too, the Hatfields and the McCoys.
It's still happening in Israel a lot.
Wow.
All the time.
So there you
And
go.
it might be one-sided, but it's still happening.
Well, they need an Ir Miklat. They need a city of refuge in Israel.
Can I say something happy? I'm going to be singing this weekend on Santa Monica Pier. I got a license, a permit, putting on a back for Broadway.
That's great. Okay, that's irrelevant. It's irrelevant.
I know. But
text me if you want to tell me that. Anyway, I want to wish you all Shabbat Shalom. And
The main
Thank
thing
you,
is that we have
character.
I was
Shabbat
really, I
Shalom.
thought it was a very interesting passage. And I want to remind you that next Friday night is Broadway Shabbat at Irma's campus.
Oh,
And I hope you'll think about coming. It's going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to
I
be
think
a lot
the
of
main idea, what happened is that you are innocent till proven guilty. This is something that we
That's
still,
right.
that's the most important thing that I got out of it.
Unless you're an adulterous wife, then they drive you
Really.
crazy. Anyway,
Thank
we can
you,
talk about
Rabbi.
that. All right, bye
Cantor.
everyone. Shabbat
Shabbat
Shalom.
Shalom.
Friday
Bye.
at the Broadway show.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
It's
Hi.
so nice to see you.
Hi,
I haven't
Pilina.
seen you for a while.
It's good to see everybody.